I was born in Calabria to an Italian father and a Maltese mother. They divorced when I was quite young, so as a result of that, we moved to Malta. And by we, I mean my mother, my sister, and I, to live with my grandparents. And I will be talking specifically about my grandmother, Mary Sultana. My mother worked full time, and we used to spend a lot of time with my grandparents. Like my grandmother was the person who would always be at home, cooking, doing the laundry, and taking care of us when we were sick. And my mom would also sometimes work weekends. So every Sunday we would go to mass. I was raised in a quite a Catholic household, not extreme Catholic, but Catholic enough to go to mass every Sunday. And funny enough, this church, the church that we used to go to, was the same church that my grandmother got married in. And the shop where my mother used to work in was actually opposite to it. So we would go to say hi and then we'd go to mass. And unknown to both me and my grandmother, I can kind of pinpoint that that's where I started. That was my first introduction to art, because this church had huge paintings of saints and religious iconography all over the church, and very highly decorated as well. Um, and I remember as a kid I would just stare at them for hours and hours, and my grandmother sometimes would kind of nudge me and tell me like, pay attention. But it was too tempting, like I just had to look. And every Sunday I did the same thing, even when I was told off every single time. I don't come from an artistic family, and back then I don't think there was that many galleries as well in Malta, so the only places where you could go and see art was churches. But I remember also that she, now looking back at that time, I can say that she also influenced me in the way she decorated her house. I remember every Easter she would bring down this miniature version of the Pietà, and it was in full color, so it was also it was painted. And I remember that there was also like blood painted on the underneath the scars. Or I remember that the statue of Jesus, his both his knees were bloody, and I just kept looking at it for hours and hours, and I never understood why. And I think that has influenced me in a way that I'm still attracted towards the visceral. A year ago, I did a project called BitterSweet on the Tongue, and I've never realized until now how prominent the aspect of visceral is, and also religious iconography is in my work. And I also did another project a few months ago, before lockdown actually, so more than a few months ago, where I was looking at the body, but in relation to how much autonomy over our body do we actually have when you start considering the body and soul. And again, the visceral was quite prominent in that smaller series. Another way my grandmother influenced me artistically was the way she would decorate the house with these pure white figurines, and then they had decorations in blue and gold. And I remember she had these really tall cabinets. She still does actually, and they were locked by key, but she would leave the key in the keyhole. And as a kid, I don't know if she actually knows this or not, I would go and open them and just look at these figurines for hours. And I think that's where my attraction towards ceramics and really glossy glaze came from. When I was in college, I did a piece called The Spotlight Effect, and it's made of these little tiles, hexagon tiles with a curved surface. And back then I was just looking at the idea of people dealing with social anxiety disorder and how they all say that they feel constantly watched. So I created these hexagons that are highly reflective, and when you stand in front of them you feel like you're constantly being observed. When I started my BA in Fine Arts, she would always show interest. She would always ask me, "Oh, what is that made of? What are you doing now?" Also, like, "Are you okay? Are you stressed?" She was always supportive. She would always, even if there was some financial difficulty, she would try and help me the best way she could. But I could never gauge if she actually liked what I was doing. That question was answered actually when I visited Malta after I moved, a year later after I moved to Ireland in 2017. So I visited again in 2018. And as I was walking through the corridor, I saw a very old study I made in college that would actually make you question my artistic capabilities, framed and hanged in front of her bedroom door. Um, and I was just surprised because that meant that she actually went through the stored work which I left behind. She selected one and she framed it and she put it right in front of her bedroom door. And the study was basically showing a boy surrounded by a lot of plants. And I still wonder if maybe it's because it made her remember of when I used to spend time with my grandfather on our roof garden, and he loved plants, so he would always be planting something. But I was very surprised. It was very sweet, a sweet thing to do. Going back to my grandmother, she didn't have the easiest of childhoods. She was the eldest of 12, and I remember that some of my great aunties would call her mummy sometimes. So like she wasn't only a maternal figure for me, my sister, my mom, but she was also a maternal figure to her own siblings. I'm glad she now has a peaceful life and surrounded by people who love her, and she's also a great grandmother of two, and I love her to bits, and I hope I can see her soon.